hello to everybody. I'm speaking from Hong Kong, actually from the 113th floor of one of these magnificent Hong Kong skyscrapers where our hotel is located. It's quite amazing to be here. Hong Kong is an absolutely unique place in the world. We have been in China now then since the last time we spoke. Um, you may recall we crossed over from Central Asia into China from the border with Kazakhstan in a place called Horgos. And then from Horgos, we drove eastward to the capital of Xinjiang province, which is Urumqi. And I had there a meeting with senior officials of the Chinese government on the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative is China's initiative to help fund infrastructure, and especially green and digital infrastructure, with China's trade partners. And it's a translation from the Chinese. The belt actually means the land route, and the road is a translation that means the sea route. So what China is financing is connectivity, both overland, like the middle corridor that we have just driven, and the sea routes, like the way from Hong Kong through the South China Sea into the Indian Ocean, into Southeast Asia, across the Indian Ocean to Hormuz, much in the news, and a place where the Polo brothers went. Actually, not just the Polo brothers, they went in the 1260s, and with Marco and his father and uncle, they went to Hormuz on the way back to Venice in 1294, I think it is, maybe 1295. But the point is that Hormuz, which is in the headlines these weeks because of this awful war, was an international city for centuries and a great trading post, and not something invented in the modern times, and not only for oil transit, but for international trade more generally into the Indian Ocean. Well, we crossed into uh, from Urumqi, and where I had this meeting on the Belt and Road Initiative, and then continued eastward, of course. That's been our theme all along. And we reached Dunhuang, uh, where the Mogao Caves were constructed, dedicated to Buddha by the many patrons, the wealthy merchants that were a part of this network. And we saw spectacular Buddhist caves, spectacular frescoes that date back to 800 AD. We saw the 35-meter tall giant Buddha, the third largest Buddha in the world, made in the likeness of the only woman emperor that China ever had, Emperor Wu Wang. Wang means emperor. Wu was her name. She was an emperor in the 8th century AD, and she was a patron of Buddhism. So we saw her likeness there. And then we continued eastward, and we went to a city called Luoyang. Luoyang was another ancient capital of Chinese kingdoms, and another famous site for Buddhism, another part of the, uh, oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. We went from Dunhuang, sorry, to Xi'an. I apologize. Um, Dunhuang is the western end of a corridor that lies between mountain ranges to the north and south. So it's the entry point to reach the center of China, and just about the only entry point because you have to go in between these two large mountain ranges. And Dunhuang led us to Xi'an. Xi'an is the ancient capital of China, very important because everybody knows it. It's the place where the terracotta soldiers are, which were discovered just a few decades ago. And the terracotta soldiers are an entire army of several thousand soldiers, each unique in its likeness, each made one by Emperor Qin. Emperor Qin is the emperor who, in 221 BC, defeated the other competing kingdoms of China and declared himself Huangdi, emperor. He was the first emperor. So Emperor Wu was the first lady emperor. Emperor Qin was the first emperor of unified China in 221 BC. And his name in Chinese is Emperor uh, Qin Shi Huangdi, Emperor Qin of the Qin dynasty, Shi, the first, Huangdi, emperor. So emperor, the first emperor of the Qin dynasty. He was a great conqueror, but also a great, very tough administrator. And he unified China. He created China's administrative system that essentially lasted until today to have a unified administrative system. And that has been in place now 2,247 years. Uh, Quite astounding. Emperor Qin also ordered the unification of the character writing system, which was in use but not standardized. And the Qin dynasty created a standardized written language, or written script, I should say, which is unique because it could be read across all the different languages of China. So it's a written language in characters. It's not alphabetic. The characters have meanings, and the meanings could be interpreted in any of the languages and dialects of China. So while there were many languages in China, just like in Europe, for example, there was a way to write that could be understood by every major language group. It's brilliant. It's unbelievable. It's hard for us in the West with our alphabetic system to understand this. You can write the alphabet for any language, but it's meaningless. If you write in one language, it cannot be understood in another language, in Roman or Greek or Phoenician alphabet, but in Chinese characters, it's mutually intelligible across all the languages because these are morphemes. That means they carry meaning rather than alphabetic sounds. So Emperor Qin did that, and he also built the Great Wall for the first time. He united many segments of of barriers that had been erected in northern China with the intent of keeping out marauding nomadic groups coming from the steppe region, which lies to the north of the agricultural heartland of China. So we went to see the warriors again. It's very, very moving. Since the last time I was visiting there, which was more than 30 years ago, two new pits have been excavated and two new sites have been opened up, and it's astounding, of course. It also, for me, exemplifies China builds at scale. You build the Great Wall, You build Buddhas 35 meters tall. You build a terracotta army, by the way, all facing east because that's where they believed that the invaders would come to the Qin uh, capital. And you build thousands and thousands of infantry and cavalry and horses and chariots in this spectacular funerary site. Well, from Xi'an, then we continued in a major turn southeast because now we're leaving the dryland region. We're leaving the northeast of China. We're getting right into the heart of central China. And the climate changes because it becomes a temperate zone. It becomes a millet and wheat growing region rather than a pastoral region. Now there is lots of rainfall. And Luoyang was a capital for the Tang Dynasty. It was a capital for Emperor Wu Wang, the woman emperor, and she built herself another giant Buddha in Luoyang, this time out of stone. Absolutely spectacular. This one is 17 meters tall, but carved out of the rock. So Luoyang is a very historic, ancient city as well. From Luoyang, we continued in the southeast direction to Suzhou. Suzhou is a place that Marco Polo visited and wrote about in the travels. He said it's an absolutely lovely city. It's a city like Venice with canals because now we're reaching the Yangtze River Delta. And so it's a wet zone. And we're reaching the rice growing region of China. And I'll explain that in just a moment. But Marco Polo has an absolutely lovely description of Suzhou. I enjoyed so much reading it and then walking around Suzhou to see this absolutely beautiful city. Suzhou is a city in the Yangtze Delta. It means that it's in the lower Yangtze River. The Yangtze River rises far away to the west of China in the Tibetan Plateau, and then it flows from west to east until it reaches the Pacific Ocean. And Luoyang is not on the coast. Shanghai is to the coast, but Luoyang is already in the low-lying delta region. So it's like Venice. It's a city of canals, and Marco Polo says it has 600 stone bridges under which a galley can pass. I don't know if there's 600, but there are lots of them. And we had a absolutely lovely visit. Now, something very important to understand about China. China had two major, highly populous centers of Chinese civilization. Chinese civilization is said to have started on the northern river, the main northern river, which is the Yellow River. The Yellow River also rises in the Tibetan Plateau and flows from west to east. And it also reaches then Beijing and empties in Tianjin, which is the port city of the capital now, really, the northern port city. To the south, running parallel approximately, is the Yangtze River. And that, as I say, also rises in the Tibetan Plateau and flows from west to east. But these are now geographically separated, and the northern Yellow River is in a cooler, drier zone than the southern uh, river, which is a warmer and more humid zone. So in the northern region of China, the staple crop is millet or short season wheat. And that's where the pasta of China is made. Whereas in the southern civilization, the Yangtze River civilization, which stretches from Chongqing, a vast city of tens of millions of people in the center of China, stretches east and flows east to the Yangtze Delta to Shanghai. And I often compare Shanghai to New York because their economic role is similar. New York was traditionally the great port of the United States because it is a port city in the delta of the Hudson River. And the Hudson River was very important because the Hudson River flows north south. And as it flows north, it gets close to the Great Lakes and especially to Lake Erie. And a canal was built in the 1820s in the United States that connected Lake Erie to uh, the Hudson River. But Lake Erie is connected to uh, uh, Lake Huron and Lake Michigan, uh, meaning that you can go all the way from Chicago by uh, by ship across the Great Lakes into Lake Erie, into the Erie Canal, down the Hudson River to New York City. So New York City became the port for the Midwest of North America. Very amazing. And it became the great port city that connected Chicago and uh, the Atlantic Ocean. And for me, this is the same relationship of the Yangtze River. Chongqing is like Chicago, it's an inland city, and it's connected to the Pacific Ocean through Shanghai, the port city. Well, in any event, you have these two civilizations of China, and China being China, in the year 610, under the Sui dynasty, they said, we'll connect these two by building a grand canal. So China thinks big. It builds the Great Wall, it builds giant Buddhas, it builds terracotta armies, and it built the Grand Canal, stretching for hundreds of kilometers to connect the Yangtze and the Yellow River. And it's wonderful because it created a system of inland navigation and water sharing between North and South that has served China effectively for 1,400 years. And this beautiful city of Suzhou lies on the Grand Canal. And it's wonderful to see because the city is a Venice of China, as it's often called, but it's also a great connector city of the Yellow River region with the Yangtze River region. Well, from Suzhou, it was a short drive eastward to reach Shanghai. And Shanghai has been for the last 150 years essentially China's New York City, its commercial city. And it's a city of great dynamism and great commerce. And I noted it's also a city of great technological innovation now. The UN ranks uh, different metropolitan areas around the world according to their contributions to technological innovation. And where I am sitting this moment, Hong Kong, and the next door neighbor to the north, where we will head tomorrow, Shenzhen, and the city just north of that, Guangzhou, those three cities constitute an innovation cluster, which the UN ranks as the innovation cluster number one of the whole world, where I am just now. Number two is Tokyo and Yokohama, which is a vast urban agglomeration in Japan. Number three is Silicon Valley. Number four is Beijing. Number five is Seoul, South Korea. And number six is Suzhou, Shanghai, because that's also an urban agglomeration. You can think of Suzhou as kind of a suburb of Shanghai. And together they constitute this great innovation system. So we went from Suzhou to Shanghai, and then we took a fast rail. Remember, this is a trip of electric vehicles, but not only BYD cars, it's also electric vehicles. China has 50,000 kilometers of fast rail. And we took the fast rail from Shanghai to reach Hong Kong this evening. Tomorrow we'll have a wonderful get together with the chief executive of Hong Kong. And then we will drive a little bit north, crossing back into, well, Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China. We cross back into the mainland, into Shenzhen, which is a city packed with startups. It really is the Silicon Valley of China, I would say. Hong Kong is the financial arm of that and the education arm of that. But Shenzhen is a city now of 25 million people. It was 25,000 40 years ago. Now it's 25 million. And it's the densest concentration of startups in the world, in my estimation. So we head back to Shenzhen tomorrow. We come back to Hong Kong for the final gala celebration of the trip on Sunday, and that will have completed the first half of Marco Polo's journey, I would say, because it completes the trip from Italy to China, 15,000 kilometers, 11 countries, wonderful hospitality and peace all along the way, charging stations all along the way, incredible change of scenery from the temperate Mediterranean climate of Italy to the steppe grasslands and desert of Central Asia, back to the humid reaches of Luoyang, and now into the tropical climate of Hong Kong. And fitting for our day, there's a big storm brewing, maybe a typhoon coming in the next couple of days. This is par for the course right now because we are in the hottest year probably in uh, the history of civilization this year or next year because of the super El Nino, which is taking shape. And that means forest fires, storms, heat waves everywhere in the world. You know it, you're experiencing it. We are all experiencing it. And maybe Hong Kong is going to feel a jolt of this in the next 2 days. So that is uh, that brings you up to date, and I turn it back over to you, Shannon and Charlena. We can take some questions and have some discussion.
Thanks so much for the update, Jeff, and a little sobering note to end on. So please travel safe the rest of your travels.
Thank you.
Lot of questions coming in. One just came in, I think is a good place to start. You just mentioned the incredible growth of startup culture in Shenzhen. Can you tell us a little bit more about maybe why Shenzhen, why so many startups? What are you seeing about the economy that's generating that right now?
Yeah, so let me just step back and say China has had the most extraordinary economic development of any large region in world history. Uh, since 1980, China experienced, well, for about 40 years, economic growth of around 10% per year. And it's a general rule that when something grows at rate X per year, it takes 70 divided by X to double. So if X is 10%, it takes 70 divided by 10, that is 7 years to double. China's economy doubled in size every 7 years. And it did that more than 5 times because it did that for almost 40 years. And if you double 5 times, that's two times two times two times two times two. That's a 32 time increase of the size of your economy. Uh, the United States, say, or Europe, if it grows at 1% per year, well, that's 70 divided by one. That is one doubling every 70 years. Or if it's an economy is growing at 2% per year, that would be 70 divided by two. That would be a doubling time of 35 years. So in the time that China grew 32 times, because it's growing 10% per year, uh, a country like the United States growing at 2% per year may have doubled once. So 32 times versus two times. That means China has substantially closed the gap in income per person with the US. Now, to give you some quick perspective, China was very, very poor in 1980 when this growth started. So it was starting from a low base. That's the whole story that needs to be understood. Basically, China did not experience the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century. It experienced Western imperialism instead. That's a completely different thing. When industrialization began in Europe and especially in Britain, Britain militarized its economy, especially after the Napoleonic Wars, and steamships using the new steam engine and powerful artillery meant that Britain created the world class unchallenged navy of the world. Britain could project its power all over the world. And it did so by beating up just about everybody. It created an empire taking over India. It created an empire taking over a lot of Africa. It created an empire taking over a large part of the Middle East, step by step in different phases. But with respect to China, it came and started to beat up China in 1839. And it's one of the most disgusting wars, not one of the largest, but one of the most disgusting wars in history. It's called the Opium War because it was a war that the British Empire fought, uh, insisting that the Chinese government, which was the Qing dynasty, open up the country to free trade in opium, which Britain was growing in its Indian colony. And so it's Indian opium, and Britain wanted to addict the Chinese public so that China would buy lots of opium, and the proceeds of that could be used to buy lots of tea, which the British people love. So they wanted to import Chinese tea and to pay for it by selling opium. It's a little bit like the narco traffickers of today coming to Washington and saying, we'll beat the crap out of you unless you open the United States to free trade in cocaine or whatever product they want to sell. That's what Britain did. It's called civilization, not very civilized in my view. But in any event, that was the first Opium War. That lasted from 1839 to 1842. And at the end of the First Opium War, Britain won the war because it had an industrial army now. And one of the prizes of the war is where I'm sitting. It took the island of Hong Kong. It took it in a long-term lease, but that was when Hong Kong, quote, was taken by the British. It was not taken permanently. Hong Kong was restituted to China after this robbery about 30 years ago now. Um, but this is when Hong Kong became part of the British Empire. Well, one sordid event after another followed China from 1839 until 1949 when the People's Republic of China was established. There was a second Opium War from 1856 to 1860. There was a civil war in China, partly provoked by these two military debacles, and that civil war is called the Taiping Rebellion. There was further demands by European imperial powers that led to a revolt called the Boxer Rebellion. That led to further crackdowns by European powers on China early in the 20th century. Eventually, there was the Chinese Revolution in 1911 and 12, which overthrew the Qing dynasty and installed the Republic of China on January 1, 1912, so about 100 years ago. But China then fell into disarray, disintegration, warlordism, and in the 1930s, Japan invaded, first in Manchuria in 1931, and then in the mainland of China in 1937. And that invasion and the Japanese War was extraordinarily bloody and costly, with more than 10 million Chinese people dying. We don't know much about it in the West, but we should know about it much more than we do. The Japanese war on China cost an estimated 14 to 20 million lives, depending on which estimates you use. There was more turmoil in the 1950s and 60s. In 1978, China was impoverished. It had had what they call the century of humiliation. It had just been one horrible damn thing after another at Western hands, at Japanese hands, internal disarray, civil war. So China ended up impoverished by 1978. But the point I would emphasize to you is that China was never the impoverished part of the world from at least the uh, Qin dynasty to the end to the Opium Wars in 1839. So roughly for 2,000 years, China was a world leader economically, technologically, a very sophisticated country, a country mostly of internal peace, not always, but mostly. And so when we think about China in 1978, that's an aberration in history. When we think of what China has become since 1978 until today, that is the normal for China. So this bounce back was unprecedented in history to grow so fast. But there's a justification. China's a great civilization. It has a great social capital. It has great capacity to mobilize public spirit, to think big, to build big, and to build infrastructure, especially, whether it was the terracotta soldiers or the Great Wall or the Grand Canal. China's a country of grand infrastructure. And that's what China has done since 1978, when finally a period of peace and reform came. Now, what did China build? Well, it, first of all, dramatically improved public health. It ended malaria, which afflicted a lot of southern China. It eliminated malaria and many other diseases. It created universal education of a high quality. It built tens of thousands of kilometers of highways and power transmission and digital transmission and fast rail. I mentioned 50,000 kilometers of fast rail, uh, going, say, 300 kilometers per hour. The United States does not have 1 kilometer of fast rail. Sometimes the train doesn't even work between New York and Washington because Amtrak is so broken down. But here, 50,000 kilometers, and you can set your watch on the schedule. You know when it's going to arrive, and it arrives to the minute 10 hours later. So, this is the experience of Chinese infrastructure. So, China did this by a very high level of saving. Chinese uh, households save, even at very impoverished levels, they save half their income. And uh, that high level of saving meant a very high level of investment. And that high investment built the modern infrastructure of China, educated the Chinese people, and provided the financing for the business investments in this country. For a long time, China was using Western technology, often with foreign companies making joint ventures here or outsourcing their assembly operations, say iPhones made in China. But starting around 2000 to 2010, China had reached a level of development that said, hey, we can innovate. We need to invest more in science. We need to invest more in technology. And starting around 2010, this went into overdrive. It became China's policy to become a high innovation, technologically leading country. And in 2015, China adopted a plan for advanced technology called Made in China 2025. And the Chinese said, we want to lead in robotics. We want to lead in electric vehicles. We want to lead in green energy. We want to lead in batteries. We want to lead in computation. And, and they went to work. They invested heavily, both public and private, very smart, very energetic young entrepreneurs, and I met many of them along the way in the last uh, days in China, uh, created astoundingly dynamic and competitive companies like BYD. BYD started as a battery maker. They thought they would put some wheels on their batteries, and suddenly they're a car company. There's a good guess that they will be the world's number one car company in the next 5 to 10 years. This is actually quite likely on the trajectory that they're on. Yesterday, we were with a young man who has the third largest battery company in the whole world. He's probably about 40 or 45. He's a young engineer. He worked for a giant battery company in China called CATL, which still is the number one battery producer in the world, I believe. And he said 7 years ago, as a young man, I have a better idea how to cut costs and speed production. He got some startup capital, and now in 7 years, he's the third largest battery manufacturer in the world. Not bad. A very nice young man. And you meet people like this all over China and in Shenzhen, where we'll be tomorrow. The whole city has boomed like this. Why Shenzhen exactly? That I think is a little bit of a surprise. The government said 30 years ago, now it's almost 40 years ago. This is kind of a sleepy village north of Hong Kong. It was an estimated 25,000 people, some farmers, some migrants. They said, let's make this a special economic zone where we will promote entrepreneurship and we will give some favored tax treatment for startups and help get startups going. Now, as I said, it's mind-boggling, but on some estimates, Shenzhen is now 25 million people, three New York cities, and that's in the last 35 years that this has happened. So it's absolutely astounding. And I think China now leads in most of the green and digital technologies in the world, especially the very ignorant and foolish president of the United States has attacked the universities, cut the science funding, denied basic science, uh, ignored the need to go green. And so, in a way, Donald Trump is also, uh, not to his intention, handed over the leadership of green and digital industry to China because he has said, we won't do it. We don't believe in that stuff. And so China's going to be the one that's going to lead the way in the next 15, 20 years. Of course, they won't be alone. India, Southeast Asia, Africa will all play a role, but China will be the dominant economy of the green revolution, the green digital transformation uh, for the next 20 or 25 years.
I think you've made that point over and over again. The whole point of this drive was that cooperation and trade and exchange are mutually beneficial, and when you cut people off, it's to your own detriment because you will fall behind. So
Absolutely. And the US is just putting up higher and higher barriers because they can't compete with the Chinese. But what happens? You just live in a delusional economy that falls farther and farther behind because exactly you've cut yourself off. And it's very interesting, by the way, just to add, of course, the US has a very good technology in artificial intelligence, but you know that China is right there competing pretty much on either at par or a little bit ahead or a little bit behind the large language models. There's a new release of just the last few days that is seemingly on par with the Claude's what's it called, the 5.0 generation of Claude, which is a leader in coding right now. But there's a difference. The US is doing this as proprietary AI. The companies are, all aiming to be trillion-dollar or multi-trillion-dollar companies, whether it's Google or Facebook, Meta, or Amazon, or Apple, or any of the others. They're doing this in a proprietary way. China has said, okay, we'll give you the code. We'll develop the models. We'll do this open source. The companies don't get capitalized at the same price because they're not aiming for the same margins backed up by their patents. They're aiming for scale. They're aiming for partners. They're aiming to spread the Chinese AI around the world. And that's what's happening. In AI is basically an array of billions of numbers, the weights in a neural network. And so this is called open weight models, where you can get the weights for free. They're published. So you can basically implement the system of DeepSeek or any of the other leading Chinese AI, and therefore, when companies around the emerging world are looking at how to implement solutions for their own companies, they're going the Chinese route. The US makes threats. Don't you dare put China into your supply chain. But when it's open source, when it's much less expensive, when it's equally or more effective, of course, it's going to spread. And that's exactly what's happening.
we have so many questions coming in, so I want to apologize in advance because I don't think we'll have a chance to get to everyone, but I do want to encourage everyone to join the course discussion board. I've seen a lot of people having lovely conversations there, so please call on each other if we don't get a chance to talk to you today. A lot of questions about China, but I do want to move away just from that just a bit so we can move on to other things. A couple people have noted that in China, but also around the world, you have some rising social challenges, inequality, high rates of youth unemployment. So you've laid out just the amazing economic boom that allowed China to grow the way it did. Is there an end to what economic growth can do? Are we at a point where it's time to stop thinking about endless growth and doubling the economy and start thinking about what do you do with all that money?
Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
this is going to be a big discussion in the years ahead. First, I do think there is very useful work for skilled people all over the world. We need doctors, teachers, lawyers, scientists. Uh, we need lots and lots of teachers. We need people who are in business who help to make the energy transformation. We need skilled farmers and so forth. But what is also true is that the technologies are leading to structural change that is very rapid. There's a lot of automation, of course, underway. That's been happening for some decades. China will have thousands of what they call dark factories in the next few years. What is a dark factory? A factory where there are no humans, so you don't have to turn on the lights. They just work by robotics, by autonomous systems. I've been to uh, a couple of these factories that were not exactly dark factories, but were close to it, where there were very, very few people. This, I think, is going to happen especially in the goods producing sectors. That means agriculture, mining, forestry, uh, and manufacturing. Most manufacturing will be automated. It will be robotics. And I think this is going to happen essentially with agriculture. It has happened in the United States, for example, that the vast agricultural output is produced by 1% of the labor force because the machines do all the work, giant harvesters and so on. And it's becoming even more mechanized and more automated over time. For many services, this is not so easy to do right now, but for some services, AI systems are going to substantially replace some of the existing jobs. So it's a big story. It will be with us for a long time, not to be settled on Marco Polo's Drive. We're going to have big shifts in the labor market. And the question is how to handle that. And I'll just make a couple very quick points in what could be hours and hours of discussion. Every major technology from the steam engine onward has changed the nature of work. It also, in many ways, has replaced workers. So we do not work as many hours per person, per day, per week as was true 200 years ago. That's a plus. People have more time. They don't have to do grueling physical hard labor on the farm, as was almost everybody's occupation for thousands of years, and they can work in safety, shorter hours, more leisure time, more time at school before starting full-time work, retirement, vacation time, and so forth. So actually, more leisure or non-work time. AI will accelerate that because we won't replace each of the jobs. We won't need as many hours of work. So maybe the 35 hour work week now in the high income countries will become a 25-hour work week or a 20-hour work week. And there will be more time for culture, study, tourism, leisure, childcare, home care, and so forth than in the past. And on the whole, this could be quite wonderful if we don't blow it in wars, if we wise up and before the climate is completely calamitous, we make the energy transformation. But there's one big issue with this uh, reduced work time, and that is that you can describe it in two ways. One is mass unemployment, or you could describe it as mass prosperity. And that is not going to be settled by the marketplace alone. That's about politics as much as it is about the marketplace. When the Industrial Revolution came in the 19th century, it led to a lot of unemployment in the countryside. People used to weave and make textiles and make yarns, and this was cottage industry, meaning it wasn't in big factories. It was the way that rural people employed themselves. Then came the mechanization of textiles and apparel. And suddenly you could have mass production of fabrics and shirts in giant factories, but it put a lot of people, millions of people, out of their jobs. And many of those people, of course, were women and children who ended up working in excruciating factory labor in those new giant mills that became called the Satanic Mills of England because they were so horrible, polluting towns. And that gave rise to a critique. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, writing in 1848, the Communist Manifesto, were not amused by all of this. They said this is leading to the immiserization of the workers. So, workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. Well, Marx didn't get all the economics right, but and he didn't get the politics right in a way also, because what happened eventually was jobs got reorganized. You needed more skills. There was universal primary and then secondary education. By the second half of the 19th century, there was more of a tendency for wages to start to rise, but politics changed also. Workers demanded the vote. And with the vote, they demanded pensions and they demanded worker compensation and they demanded uh, unemployment insurance and they demanded pensions. And so the idea of social security came to be developed in Europe at the end of the 19th century. And the political movements that I like, the social democracies and the social democratic parties of Europe, said, look, we're much more productive. Now everyone can benefit, but we need to put on taxes so that we can have the government income to redistribute the money to make sure that everybody can have a decent life. And Europe accomplished that after a lot of bloody mess and bloody wars. But the idea of universal health care, universal pensions, universal child support, universal disability help, universal public education, and so forth became the standard. So I say all of this just to say we're going to need new politics in the age of AI. If we leave it, sorry to say, to Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, uh, Michael Dell, uh, and a few others, yeah, they'll have their trillions of dollars of wealth, but there will be a lot of impoverishment. But if we say, look, this rise of abundance is for everybody, let's make sure that it's shared, partly by redesigning jobs and skills, partly by sharing more leisure time, and partly by taxes and transfers, so that everybody can have a basic, it doesn't have to be a basic income, it can be everybody has health care for free. For free in the sense that the government provides it, not based on your labor income, but based on your being a human being in a highly productive society. So all of this is to say we've got a lot of politics ahead. And the billionaires like their billions. And I like their billions too. I'd like their billions to be paying taxes and making life good for everybody. And I think that that is what the politics are going to be about in the coming years. But first, we have to stop these insane wars and stop destroying the climate so that we can get to sharing the prosperity.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I put one of your favorites in the chat, John Maynard Keynes' Economic Possibilities for Our
Great.
Grandchildren. Check that
Yes.
out. We've got 1 minute left. So in our final minute, share with us, your biggest revelation from this trip.
The world wants to be interconnected. We're already with the technologies and the solutions we need. You can drive an electric vehicle comfortably, safely, smoothly, reliably, 15,000 kilometers across the Eurasian supercontinent. And that's wonderful. And in our trip from Italy to Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, back to Kazakhstan and to China, we have found people of goodwill that say, let's stay connected. We want open trade. We don't want to have to choose between two competing superpowers. We just want peace and good relations with everybody. And so my first revelation or first appreciation is that this aimed to be a drive of peace, culture, and sustainable development, and it proved very much to be that way. And that's what people want. They want mutual respect. They want to savor their own cultures and learn about other cultures. They want sustainable development. This is all possible. Second, of course, it's not a surprise, but I learned this was fun. So I recommend people having a chance to travel, see the world. This was not hard, arduous work, I have to tell you. It was a joy and a great treat and really a lucky opportunity. I'm so grateful to BYD and others that made it possible to be able to take a trip like this and meet with leaders along the way. I brought the Pope's message of peace, his new encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas, across this region, and everybody that I was able to transmit it to was thrilled to receive it, and that's also a thrill for me. Recall that Marco Polo and his father and his brother stayed in the court of Kublai Khan, Khan Balik, or today's Beijing, from uh, around 1274 to 1291. And then in 1291, they said to Kublai Khan, we've been away a long time. We want to go back home. We want to go back to Venice. He finally consented. He liked them. Marco Polo was a great ambassador for him. So he agreed that the uh, two brothers and the son would accompany a princess back to Hormuz to marry a Persian prince, and they went by sea. They left a place called Guangzhou, which is in Fujian province, near to where we are, and Uh, they sailed westward through the Indian Ocean. They made it to Hormuz and then overland to Trabzon, where we were, got on a vessel, went back to Constantinople, and from Constantinople or Istanbul back to Venice. So it says, hey, we got a return trip to think about. So I'm thinking, wouldn't it be nice to do that Indian Ocean part? So we're thinking about the next legs of this adventure. But the big adventure for all of us is we are an interconnected world. It's really a beautiful world. We need to stop fighting with each other. We need a political class that is not a criminal class, like in my country right now, but rather respects the common good and operates with the decency for all of us. And if we have that, and if we treat each other peacefully and with respect, we're going to have a very good future. So that's my real revelation. Let me thank everybody for joining today and joining the class and joining this adventure. More soon. And I want to thank all of the SDG Academy, Shannon and Sherlina and Dawn and all of the uh, wonderful, wonderful team of the SDG Academy. They make this possible. They work very, very hard to do this. I couldn't be more grateful, and it's because of them that we're able to join together. So, Karen Chand, also who leads SDG Academy, thank you for leading this absolutely wonderful team. And thanks to all of you. And in one way or another, we'll see you again very soon, I hope. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you
Thank you
so
to
much.
everyone for joining us, and we'll see you back in the course next week.
Take care.